Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the main ballroom. We're going to get started on our afternoon plenary. If you could all find a seat, we'll get started momentarily. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. I know we're all excited because we had amazing breakout sessions. I know everything there is to know about AI now, so watch out, world, or the large learning models. Thank you. My friends from Florida know how to handle things. For those whom I've not met, my name is Andrea McClellan, and I serve, thank you. I serve for 5 more weeks, who's counting, on the Norfolk City Council in Norfolk, Virginia, and I've had the good fortune of being a New Deal leader since 2016. So come with me on a little journey. 8 years ago, I showed up outside the White House. I didn't know anybody. It was November of 2016. Fast forward, November 2024, it feels a lot similar, right? But I will tell you, the journey has been amazing for me. And for those, just a raise of hands, who's a new dealer right now? Okay. Welcome to the family. This will be an experience that you will never forget, and I encourage you to go on every journey that is possible here, whether it's online or in person. Who is a current New Deal leader who's not a new dealer? Yeah. They're all getting coffee. Okay, big question. Are there any alums in the room? Okay, here's the alums. Thank you. So I'm here today because I have been asked, and I gladly accepted the challenge of creating something called the Champion Circle. And what is that? It is a New Deal giving group, philanthropic group, to help support the New Deal and its efforts. We're not necessarily expanding the New Deal and bringing in lots of new people, because we always want this organization to be intimate. But we do want to have the opportunity to expand the programming that we provide to our leaders, so that we can have, in addition to coming here and all the various events, if you haven't had the chance to work with Ian and get some amazing training as an example, more of that. And while we've had great benefactors and we continue to do so, the New Deal would like us to help pay it forward. And I gladly stepped up and said yes, because this has been an investment in my time, and the New Deal has invested in me, and I'm a much better leader in person and future business leader, hopefully, because of it. So if you see on your tables, that's a picture of me from a long time ago. That was when I started. At any rate, you can see some more information here, but essentially, this is an easy ask. I'm asking just for 10 friends to join me. You can be an alum, you can be a current member, you can be a supporter of the New Deal. And what we're looking for you to do is to make a gift, $100 every month, and help us also raise an additional $2,500. That $100 per month, half of that is tax deductible. Half will go to the Forum, which is a tax deductible entity, and half will go to the New Deal. Now, if you can't do that, maybe you can only do $10 a month. You can join us too. We want everybody to feel invested in the New Deal as the New Deal has invested in us. I think we all recognize how amazing it is. And I just want to give another round of applause to Helen Milby and to Debbie Cox-Bolton, to all the New Deal staff. We love you. And if you want to show your love, scan the QR code. We're not taking anybody's credit card information. Not now, but we do need your information. And while you say, well, certainly you have it, if you could just scan the QR code, again, get your phone out, scan the QR code, I know y'all can do it, put your information down, and we will follow up with you as well. So without further ado, I get now the opportunity to turn the program over to my good friend Lyrian and some more exciting programming. Thank you.
Hello, friends. I am Lyrian Gaylor Baird, the mayor of Lincoln, Nebraska, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. friends and family that make up the New Deal. Our next guest speaker is from the edge of the continent. And if you don't know where Port Angeles, Washington is, it's about kind of up there. And if you can't visualize that, if you've ever seen the Twilight series, it was set in a town called Forks, which is a misty Pacific Northwest town 56 miles away from where he's from. And this area of the country is near the gorgeous Olympic National Park, created by Congress. It is home to Port Angeles is home to the oldest Coast Guard station in the country. It was a WPA project during the New Deal. And the community economy has largely been timber-based. This is a logging and timber town. It had the world's largest sawmill in 1912. And like many timber towns in the Pacific Northwest, it saw some economic decline at the later part of the 20th century. So maybe that makes sense as to why when I first met Derek Kilmer, when we were in grad school together, he was working on a dissertation about how can you help economically disadvantaged communities. And he was looking at mining towns in the UK and comparing them with logging towns in the Pacific Northwest. And maybe then it wasn't a surprise to any of us when he came back to the States after grad school and put his knowledge to work for people. He got involved in state government and economic development and eventually ran for Congress, where he made his priorities economic development and helping workforce, small businesses and jobs, protecting natural resources like the forests and ocean waters he grew up near, and taking care of veterans and military service members, like those who probably manned the Coast Guard station. He really has a view, like we heard Secretary Buttigieg speak of earlier, that government should make life better for people. It should make everyday life better. And his bipartisan emphasis has earned him quite the respect and high regard of his colleagues in Congress. He represents the 6th District and has for 12 years now. He's a 6-term congressman. He's been a real champion of bipartisan issues, so much so that as a part of his work with the Modernization Committee, one of the 100+ recommendations that came out of that committee, 202 to be precise, 202 bipartisan recommendations for Congress. One of them was that you should let members of both parties actually sit side by side because House rules didn't allow for that. He is very focused on good governance, which is what this next session this afternoon is going to be all about. So we couldn't be luckier to have him here. Fun fact about his work in Congress: he took that knowledge from his dissertation about how to help economically distressed communities revitalize and created a pilot program, which he then helped write into the CHIPS and Science Act. And that CHIPS and Science Act provision had 6 implementation grants that went out. And one of the 6 was for his county back in Washington, where he grew up. His work has been translated into real practice that is making a difference in the lives of friends and neighbors and family, people he knows and call Port Angeles home. Now, like Edward breaks Bella's heart in the Twilight series, Derek is breaking our hearts as he leaves the Congress. But like Twilight, which eventually does, I mean, I didn't watch all the movies, but it has a happy ending, I'm told. There is a happy ending here because Derek is leaving Congress to work at the Rockefeller Foundation. He has a new role as the senior vice president heading up the new U.S. program and policy team, where he will surely continue to make a difference, continue to bridge divides and bring people together. And as his mother said, she's just really relieved that he has a job. Welcome, Derek Kilmer.
My mom really is very relieved. When I told her I was leaving Congress, she goes, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "I'm not sure." She goes, "You're leaving a job without another job lined up?" I said, "Mom, I think I'm employable, but geez, holy crap." It's great to be with you. Can we give it up for Lyrian? Madam Mayor, thank you for your Terrific leadership. I also am, I am the chairperson of the Helen Milby fan club. Thank you, Helen, for all that you do to populate the earth with pro-growth, innovative leaders, and for being a great friend. I was asked to speak for 10 minutes about making government work better. That makes this one of the easier speeches I've had to give. I will tell you the hardest speech I ever had to give was at South Colby Elementary School. I was their Veterans Day speaker, and the task was to speak for preschool through 5th grade for 20 minutes. And I walked into this gymnasium filled with kids, preschool through 5th grade, and I went up to one of the teachers that I knew, and I said, 20 minutes? I'm screwed. And she gave me the best advice I've ever had in my entire time in public service. She said, Derek, here's the deal. Say whatever it is you gotta say it in whatever amount of time you gotta say it in, but if you see the kids start to pick their noses, wrap it up. So I'm gonna try to keep this short, but if you feel like I'm running a little long, you all know what to do, okay? I have so I was asked to speak about making government work better, and I was a McKinsey consultant for a while, so as a consequence, I don't go to the men's room without a strategic plan. And when we set up my congressional office, we wrote a strategic plan, and it focused on 2 things. One, creating more economic opportunity for more people in more places, which Lyrian just explained some of what that work has looked like. And second, make government work better for everyone. There's a lot of ways in which we do that, right? Every time we do casework for folks who are getting hosed by the VA, that's how we make government work better. Every time we do the important work of oversight, and you're going to hear from the folks from the Levin Center next, we do that work. But I want to actually just give, after 20 years of public service, 3 lessons that I have learned, maybe with some fun stories attached to them, and then I'm happy to take whatever questions you've got. So one, it actually takes work to focus on innovative problem solving. It actually takes, to not on point scoring, but actually just working to solve problems. I chaired the New Dems, which is, and New Dems, that's the sort of ethos of the New Dems. I always said if the New Dems held a rally on the steps of the Capitol, it would be me yelling, "What do we want?" And everyone would yell, "A comprehensive approach to job creation that includes infrastructure investment, workforce development, and a smarter approach to taxes and trade." And then I'd yell, "When do we want it?" And everyone would yell, "We're willing to work in a collaborative way that brings people together towards..." No one shows up at my rallies, but I'm working on it. But I share this with you because sometimes it's hard, right? Politics makes it hard to do innovative things when you're just trying to get stuff done for your constituents. I want to give the best, and one of my lessons learned is you can disagree with someone on 99 things, but if you can find the one thing, go do that. So, fun story. There was a guy I went to college with who I was talking to, and I said, "How's it going?" He goes, "I'm working on some of the coolest professional work I've ever worked on." I said, "Tell me about it." He said, "We're working with an asset building coalition to try to lift people out of poverty. And we've done this really interesting research. We're working with this economist at Harvard. And he found a few things. One, that asset poor people, by and large, don't have savings accounts. 2, that if they do, they're not making deposits into the savings accounts. And 3, that asset poor people disproportionately gamble and play the lottery." And he said, so this economist came up with this interesting idea called prize-linked savings. He said, what if you could take the excitement of gambling and playing the lottery and apply it to saving money? And the way it would work is every time you made a deposit, you would earn a chance, and the chance was for cash prizes. Your money would never be at risk, but rather a financial institution could use its marketing budget and offer cash prizes. Here's what they found. It dramatically influenced savings behavior. People were far more likely to open up an account, far more likely to make deposits into the account. The other thing they found was that it was illegal. So, not for any good reason, it's just policymakers and regulators never thought about anything like this. So I'm talking to this friend of mine from college, and I said, well, you know what's cool? I get to make laws now. Why don't we work on this? So we worked with a bunch of anti-poverty groups and with the Asset Building Coalition and with the financial institutions. But I was a freshman, not on the Financial Services Committee, and, oh, by the way, in the minority. So I was like, well, we got this really good idea, but I got to find a dance partner to work on. So we're going through the financial services roster, and I say to my team, I'm going to go talk to Tom Cotton about this. And my team said, Tom Cotton's very conservative. And I was like, yes, he is. But Tom Cotton had been a consultant for McKinsey, and I'd been a consultant for McKinsey. So I'm going to go talk to Tom Cotton. So I go up to Tom on the floor, and I'd completely nerd out. Like, I go through the whole thing, Harvard economist, and here's what the data show, and all this stuff. And when I finished my rap, what happens next can only be described as 10 seconds of Tom Cotton staring at me in silence. If anyone has ever stared at you in silence for 10 seconds, it is either the most romantic moment of your life or the most awkward moment of your life. And in this circumstance, it was both. But when Tom Cotton broke the 10 seconds of magic, he said, so what you're saying is you want to introduce legislation that would eliminate unnecessarily onerous financial regulations that keep financial institutions from offering innovative products that would make people more self-sufficient and less reliant on the government. And I said, sure, I'm in for me. For me, it was about helping poor people save money, but for him, it was about eliminating unnecessarily onerous financial regulations that keep people from being self-sufficient. I was like, okay, so it was a Kilmer-Cotton bill in the House. It was Elizabeth Warren and Jerry Moran in the Senate, passed the House, passed the Senate, signed by the president. Now there's thousands of people around the country who have these prize-linked savings accounts, most of whom had never had a savings account before. So I share that with you. Not for your applause, though, thank you. But because I think, part of the ethos of New Deal leaders and New Dem leaders is like, we just do the work, right? Like, that's part of making government work better. Second lesson for me has been, if you want things to work differently, do things differently. So, Lyrian mentioned I was asked to chair something called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, which makes us sound like we were the IT help desk. We were not. We were nicknamed the Fix Congress Committee, and our task was make Congress work better for the American people. About every 20 or 30 years or so, there's one of these committees. Mostly they do nothing. They pass nothing. They pass 0 recommendations. And in fact, when Speaker Pelosi called me and said, hey, would you run this committee? I was like, what have I done to offend you? Because mostly they have been an exercise in not getting things done. As a consequence, we decided to just sort of flip how Congress works on its head. So, the first thing that happens when you get a new committee is you get your funding, and Democrats take their half of the money. They hire people with a Democratic background who put on blue jerseys. Republicans take their half of the money. They hire people with a Republican background who put on red jerseys. And then we spend the rest of the time fighting with each other. So I call my Republican counterpart at the start of the work of this committee, a guy named Tom Graves, very conservative Republican. So conservative, by the way, that when he left Congress, his seat is now filled by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Very conservative. So I call up Tom and I said, got a crazy idea for you. What if we don't do what we always do? What if we just hire one staff? Some will be people who have a Democratic background. Some of them will be people with a Republican background. But they'll all put on jerseys that say, hey, let's fix Congress. And to his credit, he said, my leadership's going to hate that, but let's do it. If you watch one of our hearings on C-SPAN, you have too much time on your hands. But if you were to watch one of our hearings on C-SPAN, you would notice a few things. We didn't sit with Democrats on one side of the dais and Republicans on the other. We staggered our seating. Why? Well, because I don't know about you, like when a witness says something interesting, my genetic predisposition is to lean over to the person next to me and say, hey, that was kind of cool. What do you think about that? And in our committee, you leaned over to someone from a different party. We didn't even sit at a dais. We sat around a big round table so that we could look each other in the eye and actually have dialogue rather than debate. That was not cosmetic, right? There's a reason, as Lyrian mentioned. We passed 202 recommendations to make Congress work better, including one that's being implemented today. We had a whole series of hearings on culture within Congress. As you may have heard, it's broken. And so I called political scientists, I called organizational psychologists, I called marriage counselors, thought about calling an exorcist, to figure out, like, how do you fix the broken culture in the institution? But the best answer I got was from a football coach. I called a football coach who took over a team that was, like, notoriously bad culture, and he turned it into winners. So I called up this coach. I said, what do you do when you got players on the team who are actively trying to sabotage the team? And he said, well, I cut them. I said, well, we don't really have that option. And he said, well, let me ask you something. He said, how do you do new player orientation? I said, it's funny, Congress does it entirely wrong. Like, literally, you show up to orientation, they say, Democrats, you get on this bus, Republicans, you get on that bus. Most of the orientation process is designed to keep the two parties apart. So one of our 202 recommendations was stop doing that. And the coach said to me, he goes, I don't know much about Congress, but that seems like something you ought to stop doing. And so this was the first new class in Congress to go through a bipartisan orientation process, where they even had like a hospitality room where Democrats and Republicans could hang out together, which I think matters. I think I'm at my 10-minute mark, but I'm going to tell you just a quick third story. My third lesson is, I think part of the way we get an understanding of where people are coming from is actually to show up where people are, to actually go to where people come from. That has been the case in the parts of my district that generally don't vote Democratic. That has been the case in terms of working with my colleagues. The Bipartisan Policy Center does something I think that's really cool, which is they invite Democrats to go to a Republican district and Republicans to go to a Democratic district. And, you know, like, so I went to Arkansas and hung out with a guy named Steve Womack, who's a Republican. And we went to the University of Arkansas, and we went to the Walmart headquarters, and we did all sorts of interesting things. And then I brought him into my district, and you know, I took him into the glorious national park that Lyrian spoke to. No signs, by the way, of vampires or werewolves there. But when I took him there, the Park Service did like a bang-up job of talking about the maintenance backlog in the park system. And we're driving back down the mountain, and Steve Womack says to me, man, Kilmer, all of a sudden you got me caring about the maintenance backlog in the Olympic National Park. We went and visited the Port of Tacoma, and the port did an amazing job of saying, this is how many containers come from Arkansas and end up at our port and go all over the world, and this is how many containers come into our port and end up in Arkansas. And at the end of it, we're driving away, and Steve says, man, all of a sudden I care about freight mobility in the Puget Sound region. What the hell, man? So I share that with you because that takes work, but I think it's part of how we make government work better, is finding, you know, actually walking in the shoes of those who may think differently than we do and may have a different agenda than we do. So I'm told I should take some questions. I'm happy to hear what's on your minds. And then if you give me 60 seconds at the end, I'd like to just say something in closing, and then I'll introduce your next speaker. One question. I've stunned you into silence. Why am I leaving? You know, I did 8 years in the state legislature and 12 in Congress. I don't know who asked the question, but yeah. And I kind of look at life in chapters, and if I'm going to have another chapter, it has to start eventually. So that was it. Yeah. There are a lot of people leaving Congress who are like, good riddance, I hate that place. I'm not one of them. I got a great team. I'm really proud of my team. And we've been doing good getting pucks into the net, but it felt like time to do the next thing. Oh, one more question. Hi.
Hi, Congressman Kilmer. Christine Reeves, Washington State. I want to just say on behalf of, I hope I can speak on behalf of folks in this room, that for new up-and-coming legislators like myself, it has been really refreshing to see a leader in Congress modeling bipartisanship in these very hyper-polarized times. I think not just let's clap for that. And I can obviously testify, Congressman Kilmer lives just next door in the district to where I serve and models this not just in DC, but back home in Washington State. But I do want to say, I think, you know, on behalf of us, like, there are the one positive that I like to highlight about Donald Trump getting elected in 2016 is that in 2018, we saw more women and more people of color not only run for office, but get elected to local and state government. And that is the next generation of members of Congress, governors, statewide elected officials. And so as we see that happen in these hyper-polarized times, I just want to first say thank you. Yeah. And secondly, I guess I want to ask, as you're thinking about your transition away from government, and you've got this really cool job coming up, what advice might you have for those of us that are wrestling with whether or not we stay in this work in these hyper-polarized times, and what piece of hope might you offer us to continue doing this work?
It's a great question, and thank you for your leadership and partnership over the years. You know, it's funny, you know, I just said I'm not leaving saying good riddance, and I'm not. And I have seen such extraordinary things in my district that give me hope, right? Some of which our team has been involved with, some of which they haven't. You know, I gave bipartisanship examples, but, you know, I grew up in this logging town that crashed when I was in high school. And one of the things that bummed me out when I was running in 2012. I went back home, and the dynamic between the timber industry and the environmental community really hadn't advanced in the 20 years since I graduated high school. It was still kind of the Hatfields and McCoys on opposite sides of the gymnasium, throwing flaming bags of dog poop at each other. And one of the things we decided to do was try to figure out how, as public servants, we can bridge some of the polarization that you just spoke to. So we actually did something, we formed something called the Olympic Forest Collaborative. And we got the environmental community and the timber industry folks at the same table trying to figure out how do we manage our forests in a way that makes more sense for environmental health and for the economic health of our communities. And I'm going to be honest with you, for the first 6 months, it was just an exercise in trying to keep people in the room. And then we actually did a field trip. We actually went out into the woods. And this is why I say, part of the way you get an understanding of where people are coming from is actually go where people come from. We actually went out in the woods, and the timber industry folks said, these are ways that we manage that we think actually make some sense. And we had some of the environmental folks say hey, we think if you did this, it might be better. And it was this very rich dialogue. Next meeting we had was in a conference room, not in the forest. And the meeting kicked off with one of the leaders of one of the environmental groups say, my board has taken a vote, and we've decided we want to help you guys cut some more trees. We just want to make sure it's done in a sustainable way. And in fact, we've decided to allocate some of the money that we would usually use for lawsuits, suing when there's a timber sale we disagree with it, instead use it to hire a forester to supplement the work of the Forest Service to help you guys harvest more timber. I almost fell out of my chair, right? And I share that with you because, and I have so many other examples like that, right? It can be overwhelming, right? I got invited to a YMCA in my district thinking they were going to talk to me about gymnasiums losing money during the pandemic. You know what they wanted to talk to me about? Fights breaking out at the Y over politics, over the shirt someone was wearing or the hat someone was wearing or the cable news channel someone was watching on the elliptical. There was a NBC News, there were 2 polls last year. I like to sleep when I can, but 2 polls literally caused me to lose sleep. One was an NBC News poll that said, do you agree or disagree with this statement? America is so divided, it is now incapable of solving big problems. 70% of respondents agreed with that statement. There was an appropriately titled Battleground poll that asked Americans on a scale of 0 to 100, with 0 being no conflict and 100 being civil war, where do you place the United States right now? And the median score was a 70, meaning Americans thought we were more than 2/3 of the way to civil war. Now, you can say, okay, so what do you want to do with that information? Do you say, well, I guess that's just life in 2024, and we're all going to hate each other, and maybe we'll go to war with each other, and I got to worry when I get on the elliptical? Or do you say, I'm going to get in the game, right? And I'm going to do what I can. And for me, that's been for the last 20 years being in the game in the state legislature and in the Capitol, and now it'll be in the game in a different way, right? Being involved through philanthropy. But I think it is really important to be in the game. And that gives me hope. The Forest Collaborative gives me hope. The work of the YMCA, which actually hired a consultant that has trained their staff and trained their board in conflict resolution and now is hosting bridging efforts within their community to talk about tough issues in the community, like how do we build more affordable housing, bringing people from the Y together to problem solve. That gives me hope. And maybe that's a good way to end my remarks, which is, I like when we talk about this and when you ask me, why people should stay in it, we have agency, right? I used to say, I go to this terrifically progressive Methodist church in Gig Harbor, Washington, and I was given a quote by my pastor, and it said, it was from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and because the background is every time I left the church, she'd say, how's it going back there? And I'd always say, well, I'm genetically optimistic. That was our rap, on my way out the door. She said, how's it going in DC? Well, I'm genetically optimistic. And she gave me this sheet of paper. She said, I want you to stop saying that. I got to my car, I unfolded the paper, and it was a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and it said, there is a difference between optimism and hope. It said, optimism is a passive virtue. It is the belief that things will get better. It said, hope is an active virtue. It is the belief that together we can make things better. It said, it doesn't take courage to have optimism, but it does take courage to hope. And I like that, because it presumes that it understands that we have a sense of agency. And I also like that it uses the word together, because that's the only way we get things done. So in that regard, I want to commend you for being part of New Deal, and commend you for being leaders in your communities, and commend you for staying in the game. And I'm very excited to get to introduce your next speakers, Jim Townsend and Ben Ike, who are in the game. Elise, are you coming up too or no? Okay. When I did the work with the Modernization Committee, perhaps there was no organization that we relied on more than the Levin Center. Their work on trying to make government more effective, more efficient, on improving how oversight is done in not just the United States Capitol, but in states all over this country is second to none. Jim and Ben have both worked in the body. They understand the legislative process. They bring that knowledge to the work that they do, and I'm excited for you to get to hear from them about conducting effective oversight and how we can make our government more accountable. So thanks for having me.
Can't see my slides. Oh, there they are. Okay. There they are. Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm Jim Townsend, as Congressman Kilmer said, and this is my colleague Ben Ike. And geez, guys, having to follow Congressman Kilmer, that's not a favor. Thanks. So I was going to thank Debbie for inviting me to be here. Now, now I'm not so sure. No, it's a great honor to be with you. And I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm a proud alum of the New Deal. I was a member of the State House in Michigan, and I'm proud to be I was the first elected official appointed or nominated to be part of the New Deal from Michigan. Senator Gary Peters, he was Congressman Gary Peters at the time, who nominated me for that. I also really want to thank Congressman Kilmer. We have benefited enormously from his leadership. I mean, I just can't say enough about how he changed the dialogue about what Congress can do if it works together. And it's just been an enormous opportunity, and that leadership is sorely going to be missed. But I'm really excited about what he's going to be doing in the future. So, so we really appreciate that. Let me see if I can make this work. Okay, so Ben and I are going to talk to you about transparency and accountability, and how you can do that in a way that delivers for communities. So I'm going to, okay, so here's our agenda. I'm going to say a word about who we are, obviously. Then I'm going to channel a little bit of Carl Levin. And usually when I do that, I put on my reading glasses and I do this, for those of you who remember Senator Levin, and really get into what would Carl do in this moment, because I think it's really instructive. We're also going to then talk about TNA for policymakers. Now, it's not that TNA, it's transparency and accountability, but I'm going to say TNA a few times just so I keep your attention. And what we mean by that is, how do we get you to truly buy into transparency and accountability? And how can you then use oversight to do that? And finally, we're going to, Ben is going to walk through some frameworks that we use when we do workshops and consulting with both, workshops with congressional staff, sometimes with members, and then across the country with state legislatures. But really our goal here is to get you a little bit engaged. So toward the end, we're going to try to move as quickly as we can, but toward the end, we're actually going to sort of try to divide the room in half and have sort of half of you take on a little bit of an oversight activity on one piece, one law, and the other half do the other. So we'll see if we can pull this off. I don't know if we can. All right, so the Levin Center is an institute. We're headquartered at Wayne State University Law School in Detroit. Detroit was the late Senator Levin's hometown, and when he retired from the Senate in 2015, he came back to live full-time in Detroit and became a law professor at Wayne and established this center. What we do is we provide training and technical assistance on how to do oversight, why to do oversight, around the country and in Washington. We have a Washington office. My colleague Elise Bean is with us. She is the director of our Washington office and did a lot of great work with Congressman Kilmer and his team. We also do and conduct and support research to try to better understand how democracy, in our name it says oversight and democracy, and we firmly believe that one of the reasons we are challenged with people's, shall we say, patience with democracy, faith in democracy, is they have lost faith in our institutions and the ability of our government to deliver. And so we think that oversight and democracy are very, very closely linked, and we want you to think the same way. And finally, we have a thing called the State Oversight Academy, which Ben works with, which does this work around the country in state legislatures. We also think it's really important to engage the public, get the public to believe and understand why this matters. And so we have a whole civic education program that works with high school students to use a congressional investigative hearing as a way to understand oversight and understand history and civics. What would Carl do in this moment? It's probably no surprise to you that we think that way a lot, because Carl was such a tremendous inspiration to us. But I raise that because Carl, in many ways, for a lot of you, is a model. Before he became a U.S. Senator, he was a member of the Detroit City Council. So his background came out of local government. And his inspiration to run for the Senate occurred because he was the president of the Detroit City Council in the 1970s at a time when the city was experiencing probably the most intense urban crisis of any city in the country. And well-intentioned federal policies were supposed to be helping, and in fact, they were making the problem worse. Carl went to the congressional delegation and he got nowhere. Not because those members of Congress didn't care about Detroit, not because they didn't care about their constituents, they did. They didn't think it was their job. Implementation of these housing policies that were blowing up in Detroit's face, that were actually causing people to lose their homes, that's HUD's job. Yeah, Congress doesn't have to, he could not get them to focus. So he ran for the Senate in 1978. He defeated an incumbent, and he spent the next 36 years trying to center oversight in Congress and in the U.S. Senate. So we wonder about what Carl would ask us to do in this moment when we've just had an election that, let's face it, is a pretty strong rebuke to a lot of the things that we work on. And I think he would say this. If I can make this, whoops, let me go back. I want to say one thing about this. To me, this is the best quote from many, many quotes that we have from Carl. And I'm just going to read it. It says, "People haven't rejected the goals of our programs, but they have begun to reject the claim that our programs have anything to do with our goals." That is a distillation, I think, of the moment we are in. Sure, there were a lot of reasons, the economy, sexism, racism, I don't discount those things. But one of the reasons we were so soft, the environment was so ripe for Trump to regain power, is that the environment has been ripe for somebody like him for a long time. He said that in 1979. So what would Carl in 2024 ask us to do? Whoops, sorry. Number one, admit our mistakes. Number two, reestablish the ties between government programs and the people they're supposed to serve. And number three, dig into what it means to provide transparency and accountability in a way that it delivers results that people can actually see. How do we get there? We think there are three things you've really got to emphasize. The first is embrace our role. I say our, we're all recovering political actors here. Embrace our role in transparency and accountability, number one. Number two, embed fact-based collaborative oversight in the policy-making cycle. We're going to spend most of our time talking about how to do that and put you through a little exercise in how to do that. And finally, educate the public to expect this. Our civic education work is about that, but you are public educators. I don't know if you know that. but you're public educators, and you have an opportunity to tell people every single day what they really ought to expect from government. Oh, we're going to get to him in a second. So one of the challenges is in focusing on transparency and accountability is that a lot of people talk about transparency and accountability, but very often it is delivered in a way that really features and emphasizes gotcha politics. It's usually about somebody on a dais with a microphone yelling at somebody else. It's not what Congressman Kilmer was describing, which was more, a situation where people look each other in the eye and try to find a way to collaborate. No, it's usually about calling names. It's usually about blaming somebody else. And the problem with that is that it actually delivers the opposite of transparency and accountability. When members of Congress do it, when state lawmakers do it, when county commissioners do it, when city council people do it, because it gives those folks, those policymakers, the space to deny their own accountability. It's somebody else's fault. I wrote the law, but I'm not responsible for what happens next. That couldn't be more false, and I think all of us intuitively understand that, but we're not set up in our institutions to act on that, to actually make a difference. So we've got to move forward in a different way. We can't be that guy. Whoops. I'm not good at this. There we go. That guy. I chose that guy because I could have picked a picture of somebody serving in the House right now who acts like that, but I didn't for a reason, and that is that I don't want people to think this is only a Republican problem. It's not. Yes, there are some really bad actors. We all know who they are, particularly in the House on the Republican side, pretending to oversight. And if you think they were bad last term, we all know what's coming, right? But they're not. It is not just them. It is many of us who are more inclined to act that way than they are to really reach across and take responsibility. So how do we move forward in a more constructive way? Well, one way is to admit our mistakes, as Carl would suggest. And this little slide just gives you a sense of, one of the things we all heard this morning from lots of, from the polling and from other leaders, is that we have a big problem with working class folks, and that's even now extending into Hispanic voters and possibly African American voters. So it's a serious problem, and we've got to do something about it. Both parties, though, are aiming themselves at blue-collar workers, and you can see. I just picked these sort of at random. Republicans have a certain set of policies they are promoting to attract the support of blue-collar workers, and then Democrats have another set. Again, I'm not saying these are the exhaustive. This is all the policies, but I think both these sets of policies have one thing in common. And that is that they don't hold up to scrutiny very well. The Republican policies don't hold up to policy scrutiny. In other words, they aren't good policies if you're trying to help working class people. The Democratic policies, I would suggest, don't hold up very well to practical scrutiny. In other words, these are good ideas. They satisfy a test around whether they would help or could help people. But ask yourself, looking at that list of policies, how many of those policies, as they are currently implemented, really move the needle or have moved the needle for working class people? And I think the answer is we have not found how to do that yet, but we really very much need to. Bottom line is we have got to embrace a form of transparency and accountability that these people would recognize. And by that I mean the folks that we are not appealing to, working class, middle class folks, they're accountable in their lives. They don't do the job, what happens? They lose that job. Something goes wrong, somebody gets sick, again, somebody gets laid off, somebody has a crisis and they can't make ends meet. How many of us in this room would really be in that position if, say, the bill that we introduced and got passed actually didn't work out very well in implementation. We don't have the same skin in the game that they do, and they know it. So in order to be more able to attract their support and their respect, we need transparency that they would recognize. So that's what we're going to try to share with you today. And we're going to focus on this idea of embedding fact-based collaborative oversight in the policy-making cycle. So I'm going to say a few more words about what that means, and then I'm going to ask Ben, who's been patiently, Ben's very tall, so I'm happy he's sitting down right now, let me tell you.
I'm bringing my own microphone up. I didn't think I'm going to have to like hunker down too much.
It makes me look very short.
Yep.
So one of the ways we try to help folks understand this is first, what is legislative oversight? Let me ask, when you think of the word oversight, what pops into your minds? GAO, as one person said? Hearings, right. We think of oversight, or our inspiration for how to think about oversight can be expressed best probably by this quote from a US Supreme Court decision from 1953. And I'll just read it quickly. It's the proper duty of a representative body to look diligently to every affair of government and to talk much about what it sees. It is meant to be the eyes and voice and embody the wisdom and will of its constituents. That's actually Woodrow Wilson being quoted by the Supreme Court. The point is that if you are making laws, your actual job is to be the eyes and voice and solve problems for people. That's what this is really about. So when we are training people and showing them about how to embed accountability into their lawmaking process, into their service as legislators, again, at every level of government, we use a thing that we like to call the cycle of accountability. So think of this as kind of a clock face. It starts at the 12 o'clock with a problem. So that problem might come from your constituents, it might come from the media, but the point is that you become aware of this problem and decide to do some oversight, fact-finding. Ideally, you are asking open-ended questions where you aren't biasing it towards some answer or some legislative priority you have. You simply are trying to get the answer to what do you need to know about this problem in order to move the needle on a solution without prejudging the solution too much. That might lead to legislation or not, but let's say it does lead to legislation. Then you move, get it passed, it becomes law. Of course, very often that then leads to a regulatory process, then implementation, and then we're back up at 12 o'clock again with an outcome. That is the way it's supposed to work. How many people, raise your hand, how many people think it actually works that way? Okay, I'm glad no hands went up. This is the way we think it works. This is the bill mill approach to solving problems, and we find this in in the legislative branch at every level of government. Essentially, a problem arises, gets on the agenda somehow. There's already a set of bills that somebody's already got developed, and they insert that into the problem. Maybe there is some attention paid to the regulatory process. That depends a lot, and then that's about it. We move on to the next thing. This is not a way to encourage or gain the sort of credibility that we have lost with those folks who in their lives would never be able to get away with this. I'm now going to turn it over to Ben, but the things we're going to show you for the next few minutes, we don't expect you to remember all. There's no test at the end. So Ben's going to talk about sort of these resources and take you through some frameworks, and I'm going to be quiet. Don't worry, I'm not done.
Well, hi, everybody. Again, my name is Ben Ike. My mom was a kindergarten teacher for 32 years in Flint, Michigan, and that's the way you pronounce my last name is she would point to her I and then twist a key, so I-key. So that was the way all the kids would always pronounce it. They would always really exaggerate it. They would go, Mrs. I-key, kind of thing. So every day I get to work with state legislatures and local municipalities on how to best leverage their authority to conduct fact-based oversight. I have traveled to state legislatures all across this country and have done workshops, have helped to build and think about how we can improve capacity to just find facts, to just get information on what our state is doing or not doing, and then from there, let the disagreements and the politics flourish, but we gotta have that foundation of facts that we can use to be able to build what we wanna do next. So I just want to share a couple of different things that we have here at the State Oversight Academy. The big one that I wanted to share is in the bottom right is that QR code. We have a monthly newsletter, so if you want to keep up on the good stuff that we're doing, in January I'm doing a workshop in Oregon and in Maine. So if you subscribe, you're going to see a really nice side-by-side photo of a smiling me next to the Welcome to Portland, Oregon sign and the Welcome to Portland, Maine sign. So that's alone enough of a draw. But we also have a lot of other really good news and information about state legislative oversight happening all across the country that we share there on a monthly basis. I also want to share our wiki. So this is information on state legislative oversight in every state and territory all across the United States. We have information on your oversight committees, your authority to conduct oversight, and we also have a really interesting section on this wiki where it's agency and audit, inspector general reports by topic. So I don't know if any of you had this have happened to you, but back when I was working in the Michigan House, my boss was the chair of Corrections Appropriations Subcommittee. And I think about how there was all sorts of criminal justice policies and topics I cared about that I wanted to learn more about, but maybe at the moment I didn't have an audit report from Michigan yet. It never even crossed my mind in those days to think, well, maybe there's one in Wisconsin, maybe there's one in Ohio, maybe in California, wherever. And now we're gathering those reports and we got them all categorized on the website. So if you've got something you really want to look into more in your state, take a look, check it out, and you can always reach out to us for any questions. This thing's a hit too. Oh my goodness, millions and millions of views. It's very exciting. So several years ago, just to be able to kind of create just the basics, just to kind of frame categories around state legislative oversight and what we're even talking about, we created these 6 avenues of state legislative oversight. So the first one here, and I'll go through these and I'll be very brief on it. I could talk about this until sundown and then some, but I'll make sure it's a little brief. Analytic bureaucracies are also your oversight partners. So this could be people like an ombuds, or your state auditor, or the nonprofit community, other different resources to gather information and facts. Your appropriations process is how you can use the budget. You can leverage that power of the purse to get information on what's working or what can be done better in your state. I used this all the time back when I was working in Michigan to get a lot of information about the prison system in Michigan. And I keep thinking about some of the things that we were able to improve through doing those processes. I was asking for quarterly reports on things like parole. And I know that some of the problems we were able to solve, there's no bill. There's no bill that we could have dreamt up that would have solved some of the really horrible things that we were seeing happening in those facilities. But because they knew we were looking over their shoulder, we were keeping an eye on them, we were able to help to get things back on the right track. Committee oversight, I know one of the examples was thrown out on hearings a moment ago. That is an example of oversight. There's a lot of other approaches that committees have across the country as well. You'll have some committees that have staff to pump out reports, other different routine. Pennsylvania, within their constitution, have an annual budget hearing where the director must come in and talk about their priorities, and that's another opportunity for oversight for the legislators to be able to say, okay, for this next year, please prioritize this program, what's going on with that program, that sort of deal. Administrative rule review is varied all across the country, a lot of different approaches on this. You have some states that have committee dedicated just to administrative rule review. You have some states that have the policy committees take a closer look. A lot of different variety there. Please take a look at our website and see how your state does it and see if it's something you want to look into and doing more. Advice and consent is going to be looking at gubernatorial appointees, a new department director, something along those lines. Or if you have the reviews of governor emergency orders, that would also be considered within advice and consent. The short-suited of the 6 avenues is monitoring contracts. We have a few states here and there that are doing a pretty decent job of it, and as we've seen more and more private contracted companies and corporations that are providing essential government programs and services, there's this heightened need for the legislature to think through how to leverage their oversight authority to make sure we're getting our money's worth, to make sure that things are being delivered on time, within budget. And there's a few states that are doing a decent job at this, and you can look online for a little more detail there. And those are your overall 6 avenues for state legislative oversight. We have a nice video on YouTube, which features me. So if you want to hear me talk about oversight for 30 minutes, you can pop on there and hear all about the different avenues. So I want to also, this is kind of some basic political science language here about routine versus event-driven oversight, because the toolbox that you kind of reach for if you're in a state trying to do oversight is different if it's something routine. If it's an issue that you think has just been kind of lingering in the state and it's about time we just really took a closer look, or it's a priority, a personal priority for you, and you really want to make sure that this program's working right, the way you do that routine oversight, get the reports from the department, that sort of thing, it's different than your event-driven oversight. That's your firefighter. And so that's going to be, front page Detroit Free Press, something really bad happens. Okay, we got to get together and figure out and understand just what happened, and going through the fact finding and the steps of the investigation, which should be right here. We have our 4 phases of an investigation. So this is going to be your event-driven type of oversight, where you're first trying to gather your facts with your team, and then from there, we put a little arrow because we know sometimes with, again, limited time and resources, you have to do the hearing, which I understand, but we really do recommend thinking about that written product, because it really does create a good framework for that hearing walking in, because then the department knows exactly what you're prioritizing and what you want to talk about. And then after the hearing—
I would just jump in and say sometimes they just have a hearing before they've gathered any facts. We don't recommend that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Know the answers to the questions that you're asking, at least most of them, before you have your hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after you've done all of that and you want to find out, what happened next, what positive change were we able to impact as a result of doing this work, you do your follow-up. 6 months later, do another hearing. Be able to find out, okay, here we were and where are we now? And if there are certain impediments that are keeping us from being able to get to where we're trying to go, well, what's there? What can we do to be able to get to the desired goal, which is positive, effective governance? I want to talk about factual questions because I think this is also a good way to kind of drift away from more of the kind of gotcha, pugilistic type of oversight which we were talking about earlier. Think about your questions that you're looking to sort of get answered through oversight. You're not trying to prove a conclusion. You're not really trying to answer a hypothesis. Think about those how and those what questions. This is a great example from the one and only Elise Bean in the back, looking at during one of the investigations, among many, during Senator Levin's career, was looking at oil spills in the Great Lakes. And when they first started to look into this inquiry, they were very positive that oil spills in the Great Lakes were being caused by tankers. These boats were going around the lakes and dumping oil. And they found out from their investigation that it was actually not the tankers, it was the onshore facilities that were actually dumping more oil into the Great Lakes. So if they would have rushed right to a bill, they would have missed it. They would have missed the source and the reason why that oil was being dumped in the Great Lakes. So when you look at these types of questions, this is the one we have here. A good one is, what kind of oil spills happen in the Great Lakes and how are they handled? Is a way to be able to kind of get to that process type of a question. And now I get to kind of put together all of these different slides we've been talking about into one big comprehensive oversight plan. So when I go across the country and I do these workshops, oftentimes this is the interactive portion where people get together and they start to think through row by row by row, making their own oversight plan. It's really exciting to see them, start to do it and the plans start to come into, into reality. So topic is going to be anything that all of you wish to prioritize in your legislature. The one I chose here is looking at healthcare access for people that have been released from prison. And so I have my factual question there. This is an issue in a lot of states across the country where people are being released and they will be approved for Medicaid but not get on it for one reason or another. It's actually quite an issue. So I want to find out how that can happen. So I created my question, and then I think through, on the 6 avenues I talked about before, how can I get that question answered? Is there something that my auditor has done that I can look into? Maybe there was a report from a nonprofit about this issue. I can get that information. Maybe I can hold a hearing. I could require to the budget. Maybe there's a contract. Maybe there's some sort of a contract with some local nonprofit dedicated to helping people get access to Medicaid. How are they performing? Are they prioritizing this population? Being able to use all these different avenues to be able to try to get to my answer. You don't have to use all 6, but it's a really good exercise when you're trying to get questions answered in your legislature to think through all 6 of those and think, okay, which one of these might be able to help get me closer to answers? I got one more slide, then I'm going to kick it back over to Jim. I just wanted to bring up just another a scenario. So to kind of make this a little less academic and more kind of on the real ground here, I was thinking about, this is another workshop. This is another workshop exercise that we do across the country, looking at a flood as the example. So you have a flood that devastates a community, part of your state, and now it's been a year and you want to create an oversight plan to be able to look into the disaster response. So there's all sorts of questions you could ask. You could think, okay, are people back at work? Are the roads back built? How's the internet looking? Are kids back in school? Is the hospital infrastructure okay? All those different questions, that was the first column of that previous slide. Those are all of my different topics. And being able to kind of go through and make factual questions on each of those issues could help and really be the beginning of a really good, effective oversight report on just what worked, what could be done better for the next disaster to hit. Thank you all so much. I'm going to switch this back over to Jim.
Great. So before we wrap up, there are a couple things we want to do with you all. First is, I want to talk about a few examples of oversight leadership that really, I think, will illustrate what we're talking about. These are three leaders who are not in the New Deal, but I think they're good examples that I think will inspire. The first is Sarah Gelser Bluin is a state senator from Oregon, and she has developed a national reputation by doing in-depth and really effective oversight around child welfare, and was triggered by an event. A child lost their life while in state, under state care, and she put together a bipartisan group that delved into this issue and issued a report and did a lot of in-depth work that then led to reforms that states around the country are actually starting to replicate. So we're very proud of Senator Gelser Bluin's work, and it's one of the reasons we've done more and more in Oregon, because there's really a culture developing there, I think, of interest in oversight and accountable governance. The second person we mentioned here is Weston Newton, who is a Republican from South Carolina. And I want to make mention of Representative Newton because I want to make sure everybody understands that two things. One is oversight is something that happens in blue states and red states, in small states, in large states, in states with dense populations, in states that have lots of resources, and states that don't. But one thing that's interesting about Newton, and I'll just briefly, what he did was to pioneer, as chair of the House Oversight Committee, a process where they run through all of their state agencies on a 7-year rolling basis and submit them to a review without a sunsetting provision. They just do this, and they're very public in it, and they engage the public and the agency personnel in participating and providing information around that review. And to steal a little bit from my friend who's going to follow us in this, Jennifer Polka, they focus a lot on listening to frontline workers and listening to the people who are really the people who receive these services. And the point here is that South Carolina, of course, is a deep red state, single party control. Oregon, of course, is a deep blue state. And so is Rhode Island, the third example, Patricia Serpa, state rep. In all cases, though, they've been able to do a lot of in-depth oversight with the executive branch of their party. So oversight does not have to be, the kind of oversight you're probably used to seeing, where divided government, where people are going after the other party, the other branch. I think in many cases it happens because the party in charge feels a duty and is under a certain amount of pressure to deliver. And so for those of you who are serving in red states, really consider the opportunity you might have to work with your Republican counterparts on oversight. Now I want to talk about a few New Dealers who are doing oversight, and then I want to take advantage of a couple of New Dealers and have you take a look at their work and not evaluate their work, but think about it from an oversight perspective. So Anna Tovar is, I don't know if she's in the room right now, but she is here this week. We chose two people who would be here this week. She is the Arizona Corporations Commissioner, and her work really involves doing oversight as an elected commissioner of the utilities in the state of Arizona. And she really falls into this category of an oversight partner. So she's developing and providing information, but also overseeing the function of some of the various utilities in the state, as well as certain markets in the state of Arizona. And so she's a terrific partner. If you were in Arizona as a lawmaker, she'd be somebody you could really partner with in delving into some of these issues under your jurisdiction. Jamie Davis is a House member from North Dakota who has done a tremendous amount of work encouraging the Juvenile Justice Committee in North Dakota to use the resources they have at their disposal to dig into juvenile justice issues. They have used their interim session. Some people think the interim is not the time to do work. The interim is a time to do oversight. And her committee has done a tremendous amount of work. They've generated a report, and now the agenda in the upcoming session is going to be informed and driven to some degree by the work that Representative Davis has done. Now, to wrap things up, what we want to do is talk about, Lori, okay. Thank you so much for your work. So I want to talk about two New Dealers who have some really compelling ideas that some of you may be familiar with. One of them is Krista Griffith, Representative Griffith from Delaware, and the other is Phil Olalier from the state of Georgia. Krista has a legislative initiative that has now become law, which requires EV charging capability be in every new residential construction. So every house that's built in the state of Delaware going forward is going to have EV charging capability. So that's idea number one. Idea number two comes from Representative Olalier, and it is a really interesting idea that actually occurs in Michigan and a number of other states, where they take a portion of, his proposal is to take a portion of state education dollars and allocate them on the basis of poverty statistics. He has not gotten this over the finish line. But in both cases, I want you all, and so what we'd like to do is sort of divide the room in half, and we're going to do a quick exercise and ask for your feedback. So on sort of my side of the room, sort of from the camera over, you're going to be Representative Olalier's, you're going to be that team. So imagine you're working with him and you're looking to develop a way to embed oversight into his proposal. The reason this is maybe a good idea, it's good for accountability and transparency, but also it might be a way for him to build bridges with moderates, with moderate Republicans, because he needs to. Obviously, this is Georgia. You're not going to get it over the finish line without a bipartisan coalition. He started to do that, but maybe there's a way that oversight can help. So we want you to just think about, how did we lose our, oh well. We want you to think about his proposal. Again, it's a proposal to require that a portion of state funds for education be allocated on the basis of poverty statistics. What kinds of oversight questions would you want to ask? What kind of structure would you want to put into a proposal like that that would allow a year later, 2 years later, for there to be transparency and accountability around that proposal? Does that make sense? Any questions? All right, you all are going to we're going to give you a couple of minutes to just talk to your neighbors and think about what kinds of ideas occur to you in this space. Now, for Representative Griffith's proposal, the half of the room on this side is charged with the same question, but in this case, it's already a law. So if you were in the Delaware legislature, and I'm speaking to you all over here, what would you do to develop protocols, or what would you do, what questions would you ask to conduct oversight? What data would you want to find that would help you assess the effectiveness of this EV charging requirement? Any questions on this side? Okay, so what we'd like you to do is spend a couple of minutes at your tables talking to each other about these ideas. We have George's, the bill author is sitting at the table in the center. If you have a question for him, you can ask us, although we don't know as much about this as he does. Representative Griffith, I'm not sure if she's with us, but give yourself a couple of minutes and then we'll come back together and just hear a little bit from you about what your ideas are. Okay, so we'll just call people together. No problem. What's that? Yeah, right, let's get the Q&A. No problem.
stay up there then. I was going to float over the airport.
Yep. Sure. How do we? Can we get?
Can we get the slideshow back up? The slide?
He's got it.
Thanks.
So these are that's what you were looking for, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. We're gonna ask you guys to report out, or just raise your hands in just a moment. But those are the avenues that we're talking about. Okay, if I could have your attention, I'm sorry we don't have a lot of time to do this, but if you invite the Levin Center to come work with you, we could spend more time on this activity. We're going to start with the Georgia group. Any of the tables have a few ideas you want to offer? All right. Oh, we got it. We're going to bring a mic to him. Quick.
On poverty and education, draw a direct link between this particular section of Georgia or county or city, wherever it is, rates of incarceration, unemployment. Look at the jails, at how many inmates are reading on 3rd, 4th grade levels, and pitch it that way. If it comes down to crime in particular, talking to the other side,
right.
That's a buzzword.
Right. So using statistics, whether they're longer-term statistics with incarceration or earnings rates, or shorter-term statistics that would relate to reading levels or other test scores or what have you. Yeah. Yeah. Right. The other thing you might does anybody else want to volunteer an idea? Yes.
Just thinking, our legislature in Iowa, which is probably of the same, they care a lot about rural reading rates as well, and maybe taking a look at that in addition to what the gentleman just stated as a way of being able to garner more support. But we definitely would take a look through the appropriations processes.
Excellent. Because we're short on time, I know there's many other good ideas on the Georgia proposal, but we're going to shift over to the Delaware bill that relates to EV charging stations. Who had an idea that they want to share regarding how to conduct oversight? What kinds of questions you want to ask?
I nominated myself to be the speaker. We, using analytic bureaucracies, thank you counties, with the topic of finding out if it resulted in more EVs being purchased, cross-reference the building permit addresses for the homes that would have had to have it with the number of car registrations for EV cars and addresses from the time periods before the law and after.
Outstanding. Great.
Outstanding.
Wonderful. I feel like I just want to be fair to our next speaker, so I'm gonna wrap it up here. And just say that we finally just appreciate your attention, and we offer ourselves as a resource at any point. And again, what we believe is really important in this moment is to create accountability and transparency that the folks we are serving would recognize in their own world, their own lives. And hopefully we've given you some thoughts about how to move that forward. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I now have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, who I've come to really like and have enjoyed working with over the last year or so, Jennifer Polka. Jennifer is a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and at the Federation of American Scientists. She was the founder of Code for America, she also served as the Deputy CTO, Chief Technology Officer for the US government, and is the author of an outstanding book called Recoding America, which you might think by its title is about IT, and it is about information technology and about systems and how they relate in government, but really it is about how to reorient the government toward the people that government is supposed to serve. And Ezra Klein, the noted columnist and podcaster, called it a book I wish every policymaker in the world would read. So with that, I wanted to introduce Jennifer and thank all of you again for your attention.
Well, I could not be more honored to be here, and I'm especially honored to follow that, because all of what Jim and Ben talked about is so important to the message I have for you. And in fact, in the presentation I put together, I didn't touch on oversight enough, and yet it is so important, and I'm glad that we covered a bunch of that. I've got some slides. So I wrote a post on my Substack before the election called "Democrats Should Be the Party of Go." And now I just want to say, I want to talk about how Democrats can still be the party of go. I want to talk about two concepts. One I'm going to touch on very lightly, sadly, in the interest of time, which is abundance. Lots of people have different definitions for this word, but I'm going to generally say it's sort of tackling artificial scarcity and narrow interest capture so we can get more of the things that people need to them and rely potentially a little bit less on redistribution in order to have the equitable outcomes that we need. And the second concept is state capacity, which I think is a quite clear definition. I'm not talking about the 50 or 53 states. I'm talking about simply the ability of government at any level to achieve its policy goals. But that sounds very, very abstract. Of course, it's what Jim and Ben just talked about and gave you many examples. But for me, it became very personal this summer. I was home, I now live in DC, but I was home in Oakland, California, where I used to live for the summer, and I experienced I'm clicking in the wrong place, there we go. I experienced a home invasion. So I was on a Zoom call, I got off, I went into my bedroom, there was a man there going through my stuff, and I was fine, don't worry. But what was disturbing is that I called 911, I was on hold for 5 minutes, they dropped the call. I called back, I was on hold for 7 minutes. Oakland Police Department showed up 2 days later. So a lot of people said, you must be outraged. I was not outraged, because I was fine. I was not a violent person, thank goodness. I was curious, and what I found when I did a little digging, I think I need to hold this over here, is that the Oakland Police Department has capacity problems. They are subject to, and I counted them, 10 different oversight bodies. 80 to 90% of their time is spent on paperwork, some of it literal paper, a lot of it just entering the same information into up to 12 different IT systems. It's not just the IT though. Officers have to consider 19 different policies in a split second before they can decide whether to pursue a subject. And of course, this is, they're incredibly understaffed. The time it takes to hire a new police officer is really, really long. So these are capacity issues. And of course, then my professional person sort of kicked in, and I was like, okay, wait, what are we saying about capacity? Well, here's what we think. If you want a government that can do what it says it will do, we have a force to protect the public, you need to be able to hire the right people and fire the wrong ones. You need to burden those people less through clearer focus on what they're supposed to do and reduction of the procedures that bury them and make it very hard for them to get their work done. You need to invest in digital and data infrastructure. And I'm so glad you guys talked about this, you have to close that loop between policy and implementation. We don't have a feedback loop if you don't do oversight the way these guys talked about, so you don't know what's working. You add another oversight body, not even knowing there are 9 others. So, of course, this isn't just a problem at the local level. Approximately 2 years after the big bills of the Biden administration were passed, we had spent only 17% of the funds total. We've gotten better since then. This is a statistic from, I want to say, April or May. We've now got more money out the door, but whatever, of course, isn't out the door is now subject to clawback by the Trump administration, which breaks my heart, especially on the IRA. We saw it with pandemic unemployment, unemployment insurance, where we just didn't get benefits to the people who needed them. The first 3 chapters of my book, Recoding America, which Jim mentioned, are all on the pandemic unemployment insurance disaster. And trust me, what you think was wrong is not what was actually wrong. It's not COBOL. That's not the problem. We said, we wanted kids to be able to get their applications in for financial assistance, but that didn't work out so well. I skipped one here. When we fast track a power project under something like the IRA, this actually was obviously long predates the IRA. We fast track a project and it still takes 17 years. We are having a lot of trouble securing our nation, right? Our military is in trouble. We can't uphold the commitments that we make to our partners overseas. And this is because, again, as Jim talked about, we have a waterfall process with no closed loop where we make policy, we send it off to be implemented, and we kind of go, oh, what happened? We're not really sure. I really believe that declining state capacity is the issue, is the crisis that is underpinning all of the other visible crises that take up your time every day. You're fighting over and over again on the visible crises that people are complaining about because nobody ever, comes to you and says, hey, I'm really worried about hiring times in the bureaucracy. They complain about the outcomes, but if you don't address the thing that's sitting under that, we can't get anywhere at that. I was with City of LA, and the head of policy implementation came up to me afterwards, and she said, we have 9 priorities, but we can't do any of them because we're not dealing with that crisis underneath. So I want to talk briefly about how we got there. My colleague, so if you go into, this is a quote for someone who works at a federal agency, but you'll hear this in state and local agencies too. The legislature orders us to do something by a deadline, the compliance offices stop us from doing it. So I'm on the CHIPS team, I'm supposed to hire 300 people to get CHIPS money out the door. I hire a bunch of people. I love OPM, but OPM, Office of Personnel Management, comes in and says, oh, you used the wrong authorities, you gotta redo that all. Well, we need to get the CHIPS money out the door. This is their experience in the bureaucracy. So this is the metaphor I would like to, really, for you guys to sort of work with here. When we decide to hit the gas, but our foot is still all the way on the brake. Oh, and the parking brake is pulled, and there's a boot on the car. We've done all these things to ourselves such that if you want to hit the gas, you got to take the brake off first. And that's the work that we need to do. My colleague at Niskanen, Nick Bagley, has coined the term the procedure fetish, which people like. He says, our legal and political culture is enthralled to the belief that strict procedural rules are necessary to address pervasive anxiety about state power. If that makes sense to you, right? So we're saying, I'm not sure we can make this decision. We better have a lot of processes in place. We're worried about, accountability. And so we make more procedures which progressively burden the state and exacerbate the problems that the procedures were supposed to solve in the first place, which leads to worse service, poor outcomes, and drives that anxiety. We have to break this cycle. I know you're not all legislators, but for those of you who are, when you write legislation, you think you are writing magic words, right? And you kind of are. But much like Mickey, do you remember this cartoon from long ago? He casts a spell to make the broomsticks carry his water for him, but then he goes to sleep. and I think we've been asleep. And what happens? He wakes up, and the broomsticks have multiplied, and they are now drowning him in water. That is what's happening with a lot of our law and policy. We don't think we've done it. We wrote a simple, clear law, right? But take NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, for example. Do you know what it really says, like in just the law? There's no project review required at all. My colleague, Mark Dunkelman, says it's like, what the authors envisioned was that two bureaucrats would kibitz for a few minutes every year and talk about the general direction of environmental policy. Now, and I've been told these numbers are wrong, but now, of course, we review every project. The average time to complete a NEPA review is 3 years. I think it's actually, they've been told it's higher. The average environmental impact statement report is, I've been told, 2,000 pages. I was apparently looking at different numbers. So it started with this very simple intent, and over time it became absolutely unmanageable. And the result is what's really important here, because we wrote the law to protect the environment. But now what it's doing is keeping us from building the green infrastructure we need to avoid a climate collapse so that we can protect the environment. So this is what I call the cascade of rigidity. High-level intent, high-level rules. When that cascades through a very rigid bureaucracy, at every level, the next person makes it a little bit more rigid and a little bit more rigid. You start out with a low-burden idea. What comes out at the end is a very high-burden idea, but more importantly, you start out with a written intent, and what you get is either not that intent, less of that intent that you wanted, or the opposite of that intent. So, I want to return to the notion that if you want a government that does what it needs to do, you're going to have to do these things that your constituents are not actually asking you to do, because they don't know that this is underlying this. I'm going to tap on the last one a little bit more, closing the loop with, between policy and implementation for feedback loops. Instead of that policy implementation shrug, and this actually, I think, resonates again with Jim and Ben's circles. We need this feedback loop. So we build, measure, learn, understand what's going on. And there's a lot to say, I think, about the mechanisms that are being tried now to close that loop. I'm going to skip this slide. There's a bunch of very concrete things I think we can do, policy recommendations, operational work. But what I want to say they kind of all add up to, and we can return to this in Q&A if you want to, is that we have the wrong mindset, I think, about what elected leaders are supposed to do. We think that your jobs are to plant seeds. Those seeds are initiatives or bills or executive orders or whatever they are. And when the idea is that when those seeds grow into something that provides shade or fruit or flowers for the public, you've done good and you're going to get elected. Anyone here a gardener? How much of your time is spent planting seeds? You tend the soil. That's not what the public is asking of you. You go back to get reelected, you say, oh, I want to show you my legislative record. But what we need to do is tend the soil. And I'm recently interested in sort of mashing that metaphor up with another one, which is of fires. So I live during summers in a very tiny town in rural California. Boy, is that area red. I think I am the only Democrat. And it is in the highest fire risk in the state, which must be the highest fire risk in the country. Like, this place is gonna burn. When we first were moving there, the fire chief, who's our neighbor, came by and he said, when Native people controlled this land, there were 50 stems per acre. There are now 1,500 stems per acre. That is a fire management problem that is almost unsolvable. When Native people lived on that land, they did controlled burns. That is how the soil remained healthy. That is how the underbrush got taken away. And in 1850, we passed a policy of fire suppression. And now there is so much fuel that what we're getting is megafires. What we need to do are controlled burns. But it's the opposite of what we have been doing. We gotta stop putting out those fires. We gotta start them And unfortunately, I think in the federal government context, now we're gonna have to start a few that serve as sort of blockers for the megafire that's coming. But we as Democrats have to start owning that controlled burn, because it's the soil, it makes the soil healthy, makes our bureaucracies work better, and it delivers for people. We can't be the party of government if government doesn't work. I want to leave you with a couple of recommendations. I put my book up there. I'm usually not very self-promotion, but I'm told to do it. And then, of course, Jim promoted my book, so thank you. There's a book coming out called Why Nothing Works by Mark Dunkelman. You have to, as a Democrat, you have to read this book. It is definitely the left lecturing at the left about what we have done wrong, and it asks for a mind shift. It is a shift in how we think about progressive politics and the outcomes that they're actually getting. And I can't recommend it highly enough, but it's not out till February 18th. And please, I invite you to subscribe to my Substack, which is weirdly called Eating Policy, which is like a terrible name. I know, it's a weird name. It's because I have a concept in my book that culture eats policy, right? You've heard the, culture eats strategy, but in is eating the intent of the policy, and that's what's coming out the other end, but nobody gets it, so it was a very bad name. But anyway, I hope that you'll follow up in that way, and I would love to take some questions.
Jen, I really appreciate all of your contributions. I think you've been a breath of fresh air. How do you, as a bona fide Democrat and who really cares about these policies and making government work, deal with the incoming from people who think that your criticism of how government is actually working is creating more of a problem? What are the strategies, or how do you kind of disarm or diffuse that criticism?
Well, I think the vibe changed a lot on November 6th. I think that both past speakers talked about it. We've got to tell the truth. I am often told, don't say that it doesn't look good for Democrats. And I'm like, yeah, losing doesn't look good for Democrats either. We have got to also be the party of telling the truth. I mean, how I diffuse it is, I just keep saying what I need to say. Though I will say, I also have been softer in my criticisms. And you go softer in your criticisms leading up to an election, right? And that makes sense. I'm a Democrat. But now I've become a little bit of a focus point or focal point for public servants. I know most of my social circle are people who work in agencies. State and local as well, but certainly, heavily federal. And yes, they are horrified by the prospect of Schedule F, which is a terrible idea that gets at the root of the civil service's independence. But secretly, they don't want to say it publicly, but to me, they'll say, a reduction in force would actually make my agency work better. Not the way, unfortunately, Elon Musk is going to do it, but if we could do it actually based on performance, we would do better. If we could do some of this regulatory rollback that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are talking about, I would be so much more effective in my job, and that's what I want. That's what I want for years, is to be able to serve the public, to be able to get these veterans benefits out. And they don't want to say it publicly, so they say it to me. And I think we need to start saying it publicly. We have nothing to lose now.
Is that some of what you mean by the opportunity of controlled burn?
Yes.
Do you want to? Can you say anything more at a local level for us about what you see on that opportunity landscape?
Yeah, I mean by controlled burn, I mean what was the example that Congressman Kilmer gave about the regulations? Oh, that for instance that kept the that nonprofit from being able to do the innovative financial program. I mean, that was, I think, the case of needing to update a regulation because that, they hadn't anticipated that kind of innovative program. But if you've not spent time in an agency or department and seen how hard it is to get the work done, you don't really understand how much governs the work that is being done and how much those public servants want that rolled back. And it sounds, I mean, I kind of figured this out like 10 years ago when I started Code for America, and I was like, oh my God, am I a Republican? I'm like deregulatory? Like, is that what this means? And I'm not horrified by the idea of being Republican, but like I think that my values align with the Democratic Party, but the controlled burn is about clearing out that cruft that keeps the agencies from being able to deliver at the speed that and quality that they need to. It's not just that, but that's certainly, I think, the biggest part of it. What we forget is that when, whether it's at the legislative level or in the executive branch, whenever we add a rule, first of all, it's adding to, we always add and never subtract, which makes it so hard to do anything. And also that when we think it's a simple thing, not a big deal, why would we worry about this? You don't realize how how cumbersome it's going to get over time. Representative, I'm going to mangle her last name, from Washington is on Twitter talking about being told about a regulation that keeps childcare workers from cutting up, for peeling a banana or an orange for kids. Whoever wrote that did not think they were doing a bad thing. But that has resulted in a bad thing. And we need to spend more time taking those things away than we do adding new things. There's also, frankly, programs that just shouldn't be anymore. I mean, there's something at the Social Security Administration that gives, when your partner dies, if they've worked for a certain number of years, they get a $225 death benefit. Well, that was intended to cover funeral costs in 1950-something, and Congress has capped the benefit. We're still spending all of the energy and time, delivering a program that is like de minimis in terms of its benefit to anybody. It's only ever going to be $225. Like, just take that away and spend your energy actually getting the results that are needed to, put those people on fixing the disability backlog. That's, completely unacceptable, the disability. I'm experiencing this right now.
Thank you so much for your bravery. And I'm from Santa Barbara, California. And
a little about fires.
Yeah, exactly. So we have one of the worst poverty rates in our county in the state. And yet, as of several years ago, we had also one of the worst participation rates in food stamps. I know you've done a lot in that area. Can you just give the rest of us a refresher on the bureaucracy there and what you've done and how that's getting better? Because it's something I'm really tackling. We also have 800 people working in our social services department, yet we still have the second highest rate of poverty. So it's just this maddening thing I've been trying to cut and get at the heart of why we're not reaching people.
Yeah, and I love California, but we have this state that shows that when you have a whole bunch of resources and it gives you the ability to make things really complicated, you get worse outcomes, not better. So when we started working on SNAP in California in 2013, I think, California was second worst in the country on participation in SNAP. The only state with a lower participation rate was Wyoming. Compare with Maine, which had a very anti-welfare leader and very anti-welfare welfare rhetoric, and therefore a very small team to deliver. So Maine had a very simple application for applying because they couldn't hire Deloitte to spend billions of dollars building it. California did. The application didn't work on a mobile phone. It was 212 questions. Some of those questions were things like, have you ever been convicted of selling your SNAP benefits for drugs, ammunition, or guns since April 12th, 1995? And there's like a whole series of questions like that are just completely insulting, And by the way, I think that picks up on this issue of like, we think we have done a good thing for people, but if we actually haven't tried to apply ourselves, we don't know how much we are insulting the people that we're trying to help. So Code for America, we made a very simple app that worked on a mobile phone that used branching logic, so we could only ask you the questions that you needed to. Because SNAP required at the time, and I guess it still does for now, an interview, we're like, we don't have to ask all of these questions. Like, what we need them to do is upload their pay stubs so that when the social worker talks to them, they can verify the income. And like, that's the thing. The thing you most need is their documentation, their name, phone number, and email, and then let the social worker do the rest. And basically that would create an application that we would feed into the My Benefits CalWIN system, which I don't think you guys are My Benefits. You were there are 3 different consortia in California, depending on where you were. But and that was sort of the start of this realization that that's a big reason why we had such a low participation rate, is nobody could get through that 212 question form, especially if you go to the library and the computers time out after 30 minutes, but you can't get through the application in 30 minutes. So like you just sort of start over when the thing times out. The participation rates in California have gotten better. What they were trying to do at the time, and I think this speaks to sort of our instincts, was like advertise the program. So there were bus ads all over the low-income parts of San Francisco advertising the program. Like, nobody bothered to try the application to see that you could get someone to go to it, but you couldn't get them through it. And that, I think, is indicative of what I'm hoping Democratic leaders will do more of, which is like dig in. The best advice I ever got from my team at Code for America is never talk about a service you haven't tried to use yourself. We're good?
Shout it out, Monroe.
Okay. Jennifer, so excited you're here. Monroe Weinberg, Burlington, Vermont. Love your book. Excited to see you part of this conference. You're speaking to a room of elected officials. Have you seen any examples of candidates who have tried to sort of center campaigns around this kind of thinking in some way and succeeded at that, got themselves reelected?
I am the opposite of a political consultant, and so do never, ever ask me for advice on what to run on. Right? Who here is that person? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm not that person. I don't think you can run on a platform of civil service reform or benefits, but I think you can sometimes talk about the results once you've done them. And I think as a party, it's simply the right thing to do to make these things better. But I would be an absolutely terrible politician. But as an example of people who are doing the work, not running on the work, I'll give you this one. David Chu, the city attorney of San Francisco, brilliant guy. We're working with him and the Stanford Reg Lab to use large language models, AI, to go through the volumes of policy and regulation that govern the city of San Francisco and simplify them. So I'm sort of simple example because it's not having a real impact right now, but Santa Clara County was full of these terrible old racial covenants that you could never have found before, but now an LLM can get them and actually see, okay, this reference to a racial covenant actually is, hits a different document, and they can sort of spider out and get all of the references and actually remove them. But I think something more substantive is San Francisco is known for the $1.7 million toilet. Do we all know about this? That obviously is the result of layers and layers of governance and policy. And so we're, it's not that LLMs are doing the work, but they can be helpful in understanding, okay, if this was one of the things that contributed to that $1.7 million price tag, how do you unravel it? Well, you've got to follow the chain back. There's not like one place in the law. How do you follow it back and say, how are we going to unravel this piece? How are we going to unravel this piece so that we can, make a toilet for, let's just say, $500,000. So he's just an incredible leader. I don't think he intends to run on it, but man, is he working hard to make San Francisco better. And I know he would be, I think he's been part of New Deal before, but if not, you should have him come talk about it. There's all sorts of great examples of this clearing of the brush going on, and I hope that next time I'm here that you all have your own stories about them. Thank you.
All right, I want to make sure everyone has some downtime before dinner, so I'll make this brief. We are going to be, for those of you that are invited to the VIP dinner tonight, it'll be at the MLK Library, which is just down the street, 901 G Street, starting at 6:30 p.m. It is 0.2 miles away, so we will not have bus transportation to dinner. But we will be meeting in the lobby around 6 o'clock, 6:10 to walk over in groups. So if you are staying at the hotel and want to walk with us, we'll be in the lobby starting at 6. Thanks everyone for a great first day, and we'll see you back here at 9 a.m. tomorrow.